Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of love, unexpected connections, and second chances. Today's story follows Blake Richardson, a successful businessman who accidentally crashes a wedding and unexpectedly reconnects with Hannah Mitchell, a sharp and ambitious woman from his past. What starts as a chance encounter at a wedding turns into a journey of rediscovery, challenges, and an undeniable chemistry. Join us as we explore how sometimes the most beautiful things in life happen when we least expect them. Please subscribe to our channel to start today's story. It was supposed to be just another meeting, another stop in the relentless cycle of business that had become my life. My name is Blake Richardson, and I'm the type of person who's constantly rushing from one deal to the next, hardly stopping to take a breath. I didn't expect to be walking into a wedding that evening, especially not one as lavish as the one I found myself in. But as fate would have it, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe it wasn't by accident after all. I pushed open the grand oak doors of the venue, the sharp navy suit I wore barely wrinkling despite the hurried pace I had set for myself. It was as though I was used to these situations, my mind always thinking 10 steps ahead, planning my next move while walking into a place that had nothing to do with the business at hand. The venue was everything one would expect from an extravagant wedding, lush floral arrangements that seemed to have no end, chandeliers twinkling in the soft light of the evening, and a crowd of elegantly dressed guests who all appeared to have come from a world far removed from mine. I had no idea whose wedding this was. The truth is, I wasn't here to celebrate love or witness a beautiful union. I was only here because my business partner, Ethan, insisted that this venue was the perfect place for our meeting. The wedding, I assumed, was just an afterthought. I couldn't have been more wrong. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, and I was about to politely excuse myself when I heard a familiar voice that stopped me dead in my tracks. Blake Richardson? I turned toward the voice and saw her. It took only a second, but it felt like time had stretched out indefinitely. Standing at the front of the room, amidst the bridesmaids, was a woman I hadn't seen in years. Her name was Hannah Mitchell. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized her, though it had been nearly a decade since I last laid eyes on her. I never thought I'd see her again. Yet here she was, her auburn hair swept elegantly into a twist, wearing a pale blue bridesmaid dress. She looked even more breathtaking than I remembered. I knew who she was the moment I saw her. The sharp-witted, headstrong woman who had always stood out back in university. Hannah was the one who always challenged me. The one who effortlessly stole the spotlight in every business class debates we had. Always pushing me to think beyond the obvious. I couldn't help but smile, a mix of nostalgia and admiration flooding over me. She turned her head, and our eyes met. Her lips parted slightly in surprise. I saw her grip tighten on the bouquet she held, and she mouthed my name, barely audible beneath the soft music playing in the background. Blake? Her voice sounded distant, yet familiar. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind in that moment. But before I could respond, the bride and groom kissed, and the guests erupted into applause. The moment passed, and I quickly slipped into an empty seat, trying to process the unexpected encounter with Hannah. I hadn't planned for this. But now that she was here, I wasn't sure I wanted to leave. Minutes later, as the guests milled about for the reception, Hannah approached me. There was a fire in her eyes, and the energy between us immediately reignited. Blake Richardson, she said, folding her arms. You're crashing this wedding, aren't you? I let out a low chuckle, my gaze briefly sweeping over her. It's good to see you too. Hannah. Her eyes narrowed, clearly not buying my casual demeanor. You didn't answer my question. I wasn't supposed to be here, I admitted, running a hand through my dark hair. I was supposed to meet someone. Didn't realize it was a wedding until I walked in. Hannah sighed and shook her head. Of course. You'd accidentally stumble into a wedding like it's just another business meeting. To be fair, I countered with a smirk. I didn't expect to see you here either. This is my best friend's wedding, she explained, gesturing toward the bride, who was now laughing with guests nearby. And you're still running the business world. I see. I gave a half smile. Still making deals. Still making headlines. Still insufferable, she muttered, rolling her eyes. But I could see the hint of amusement in her expression. I couldn't help but laugh. The old Hannah was still here. And for some reason, that made the situation a little less awkward. And you? Still challenging everyone in your path? Her expression softened slightly, a quiet pride in her gaze. You could say that. I run my own interior design firm now. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed. I had always known Hannah was ambitious. But to build her own company? That was something I couldn't ignore. I respected her for it. More than she probably knew. Before I could respond, the music shifted, and the bride's voice rang out, announcing that it was time for the first dance, and for the bridesmaids to join in. Hannah groaned. I hate wedding traditions. I grinned, feeling the playful tension between us. Lucky for you, I happen to be an excellent dancer. She shot me a look of disbelief. You just said you weren't invited. Doesn't mean I can't dance, I said smoothly, offering my hand to her. Hannah hesitated for a moment, then finally relented. Fine, but if you step on my toes, I'm never letting you forget it. I chuckled. Deal. As I pulled her close and we moved effortlessly across the dance floor. Something shifted in me. This night had just become a lot more interesting. As we swirled across the dance floor, the world around us seemed to blur. The chandeliers overhead cast a soft, golden glow over the room, and the hum of the music filled the air. For a moment, it was just Hannah and I, two people, once so familiar, now dancing as if no time had passed since the university days. Her hand rested lightly in mine as we moved in sync, her figure close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. Her breath soft against my ear as she murmured playfully, still as arrogant as ever. I couldn't help but smirk. Confident. Hannah, there's a difference. She tilted her head back to meet my gaze, her eyes sparkling with mischief. You always had a way of turning everything into a debate, she said, her lips curving into a smile that I hadn't seen in years. It was like stepping back into a past I hadn't realized I missed. I spun her in a smooth twirl before pulling her back in. I seem to remember you enjoyed winning those debates just as much as I did. Maybe, she admitted with a slight shrug, her face unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something behind her eyes, something softer. But it's been years, Blake. People change. Her words hung in the air between us like a question neither of us wanted to answer just yet. I couldn't help but tighten my grip around her waist, as if to hold on to the moment, unsure of how to bridge the distance that had developed between us over the years. I guess that's true, I said, the uncertainty in my voice betraying the confusion I felt inside. How had we both changed? Or had we? Before I could analyze it further, the song ended and applause erupted around us. The music shifted to a faster tempo, and Hannah stepped back, breaking the spell between us. She smoothed the fabric of her dress, as though trying to regain her composure after the brief moment of connection we'd shared. Thanks for the dance, she said, her tone a little more formal now. She quickly turned away, no longer meeting my gaze. I've got bridesmaid duties to attend to. I stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd. I wasn't sure why I was still watching her. There was something about Hannah that had always been impossible to ignore. After all these years, nothing had changed. She still had that magnetic pull, that quiet strength, that presence, the way she could command attention without saying a word. I needed to collect my thoughts, so I grabbed a glass of bourbon from a passing waiter and took a slow sip. The burn of the alcohol was grounding, but my mind was still swirling. I hadn't expected any of this, a wedding crash, a reunion, the undeniable chemistry, and now that it had happened, I wasn't sure I wanted to just let her slip away. The reception unfolded around me, a sea of chatter and laughter, but I felt oddly disconnected from it all. That is, until I saw her again. She was talking to an older woman by the bar, her expression warm and attentive, her smile genuine as she nodded along to the conversation. I couldn't help but admire the way she moved through the room, effortlessly at ease, yet always maintaining a certain distance from anyone who wasn't worthy of her attention. I hadn't been the only one watching her. Though, a voice interrupted my thoughts. Didn't think I'd see you at a wedding. Callaway. I turned to find my business partner, Ethan Graves, approaching with his usual confident swagger. Ethan was the last person I wanted to talk to at that moment. But it was impossible to ignore him. This wasn't exactly planned, I admitted, setting my glass down. You're the one who insisted we meet here. Ethan grinned, clearly amused by the turn of events. Best decision I've made all week. Seeing you dance with her was worth it. I rolled my eyes. Are we going to talk business or not? Ethan waved a hand dismissively. Relax. Enjoy the night. There's time for business later. Before I could argue, Ethan's gaze shifted past me. Looks like someone else wants your attention. I followed his line of sight and saw Hannah approaching again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She was determined, walking with purpose toward me. I need a favor, she said, skipping the pleasantries. Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the directness in her tone. That's direct. Hannah barely spared him a glance before focusing back on me. The bride's cousin was supposed to give a speech. But he's missing. Since you seem to enjoy inserting yourself into situations, I figured you wouldn't mind helping out. I leaned back slightly, a smirk curling at my lips. You want me to give a speech at a wedding I wasn't even invited to? You're a businessman, she shot back, crossing her arms. You've given speeches before, and considering you waltzed in here uninvited, you might as well contribute something. Ethan let out a low chuckle. I like her. I ignored him, still studying Hannah. And what do I get in return? Her jaw tightened, but she held my gaze. What do you want? I could have asked for anything in that moment. Anything to push her boundaries further. But there was only one thing that truly interested me tonight. Dinner, I said simply. Her brows furrowed. What? You and me, I clarified. Dinner, one night. Hannah hesitated, clearly weighing her options. After a moment, she exhaled, relenting. Fine, but only because the bride will kill me if there's no speech. Consider it a deal. I adjusted my cufflinks and gave her a mock bow. Now if you'll excuse me. I have a wedding to charm. As I stepped toward the microphone, I could feel her eyes on me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I was more excited or nervous. One thing was certain, though, I wasn't letting her slip away again. The microphone felt cold in my hands as I stepped up to the stage. My gaze momentarily catching Hannah's as she stood near the bar, watching me with a raised eyebrow. I could feel her judgmental stare, but there was something about it that made me want to impress her, something familiar. Something I had missed. The crowd hushed as I cleared my throat. But I had no intention of giving the kind of speech I usually delivered at business conferences or meetings. This wasn't about closing deals or making a pitch. Tonight, this was personal. I was here because of her. Good evening, I started, my voice steady despite the nerves buzzing beneath the surface. I wasn't originally invited to this wedding. And to be honest, I'm still not entirely sure how I ended up standing here. The crowd chuckled, and I could feel a wave of laughter ripple through the guests. I had them hooked already. My eyes swept over the room. But my focus kept drifting back to Hannah. She stood just off to the side, arms crossed, her expression skeptical yet intrigued. She had a way of making me feel like the center of her attention. Even when she didn't mean to. I was supposed to meet someone here tonight. I continued, glancing at Hannah again, but instead, I ended up crashing a wedding, and not just any wedding. Mind you, but one with a great crowd and, of course, a stunning bride. Laughter followed, and the atmosphere relaxed further. But then, I turned my attention directly to Hannah, who stood with that perfect blend of skepticism and curiosity. I also ran into someone here I thought I'd never see again. I said, my voice quieter now, the room falling silent. A woman who, years ago, could challenge me on any topic and leave me speechless every time. Hannah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't move, she didn't even blush, though I could see the subtle change in her posture. She knew I was talking about her. Her name's Hannah Mitchell, I said, smiling at her now, and even though I used to think I knew everything about business, She always managed to remind me that there was more to life than just the next deal. She taught me that. There was a moment of silence. A beat where the tension between us was almost palpable. The crowd seemed to sense it too, watching us closely, waiting for what came next. Hannah's eyes softened just a fraction, but she remained composed, her expression unreadable. I knew, though, that the old chemistry we shared was still there. There was something in the air between us that wasn't just about the past. It was something real, something that hadn't gone away despite all the years apart. As I look around at all of you here tonight, celebrating love, family, and friends, I continued, looking back at the guests now. I'm reminded that life doesn't always go according to plan. But that's what makes it worth living. The surprises, the moments you never see coming. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts as the crowd hung on my words. Hannah's gaze never left me, her presence steady but intense, as if waiting for me to finally say something that mattered. To love and to be loved. That's what it all comes down to in the end, I said softly, a genuine sentiment rising in my chest. And here's to those who remind us that the journey is just as important as the destination. The applause that followed was warm and sincere, but I couldn't focus on it. My eyes were still on Hannah. I had no idea where this was going, but I was certain that something had changed between us, something that had started back in university. Something that time and distance had only intensified. After the speech, I made my way back to the reception, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. I had spoken from the heart, and though it wasn't the most polished speech I'd ever given, it felt real. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, tonight was about more than just an accidental wedding crash. When I returned to the table, I saw Hannah again, standing by herself for a moment. She was scanning the room, but the moment her eyes landed on me, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corners of her lips. I felt a spark of hope ignite inside me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't letting her walk away again. Before I could move towards her, I saw Ethan, my business partner, approaching with his usual grin plastered on his face. "Nice speech," he said with a wink. "But we both know what you really want to talk about." I rolled my eyes. "Not tonight, Ethan, not tonight." But even as I said it, my mind kept wandering back to Hannah. The rest of the evening unfolded in a blur of laughter and clinking glasses. But the only thing I could focus on was the idea that this could be the beginning of something new. Something real. As the evening drew to a close and guests started leaving, I found myself watching Hannah from across the room, her silhouette framed by the soft lighting. She was engaged in conversation with the bride, but every now and then, her gaze would flicker toward me. I couldn't help but smile. This night had turned into something unexpected, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. I walked toward her, ready to make my next move. As the weeks passed, Blake and Hannah continued to work together on their project, the chemistry between them growing stronger with each meeting. Their late-night conversations, sometimes about business and sometimes about personal dreams, turned into something deeper. Blake admired Hannah's dedication to her work and her fierce independence. Meanwhile, Hannah began to see a different side of Blake. The man who had once been so focused on his empire was now someone who wasn't afraid to show vulnerability. One evening, after a long day of working on the project, Blake invited Hannah to dinner at an intimate rooftop restaurant. The city's skyline stretched out before them, a sea of lights twinkling beneath the dark sky. Over dinner, Blake took her hand in his voice soft but sure. "I know we've both been caught up in our careers for so long. But there's something I can't ignore between us. I don't want to walk away from this." Hannah looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else, something deeper. "I don't either," she whispered, her heart finally ready to accept what had always been there. From that moment, everything shifted. Their professional relationship evolved into something much more personal. Together, they built not just a successful business but a partnership that was rooted in trust, love, and respect. As they walked through life together, Blake and Hannah realized that sometimes the greatest moments happen when we stop chasing what we think we want and let life surprise us with something even better. They were no longer just two people from the past, they were building a future together. If you were inspired by this story of unexpected love and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories.